never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you're neither wrong or right. You never know if you don't roll them dice. You better roll them dice. You never know if it could change your life. Take a chance.
Hi, Rob. I'm behind you.
Oh, Matt. Well, that's not where I want you to be. So I'm going to perform a inverted J hook maneuver to end up on your tail. Our roles are reversed.
I will scissor S. No, wait. No, damn it. That just my turning radius is not good. You've won the chase, Rob. Just shoot me down.
That's right.
I'm ready to
bail. Too close for missiles, switching to guns. Hello, everyone. This is Dungeon Master of None. I'm Rob.
I'm Dungeon Master Matt.
And tonight we are talking about chases. We're talking about chase scenes and pursuits and following. We're talking about, a big old trope here. This is something that more and more often, I think,
we're seeing it more and more.
More and more people are saying more and more chases because of the obvious influence of movies and TV on tabletop RPGs, and not just books, though I want to circle back around to that. I think it is becoming more and more common to include ideas about or even rules for chase scenes. And I think this is good because chase scenes are a big part of our sort of dramatic vocabulary, our, storytelling vernacular. I have a lot of favorite chases. Matt, do you have some favorite chases from cinema, television, literature?
I think back, to the Odyssey, Homer. No, wait, no, I don't care about those. I mean, you can't go wrong with like a whole movie chase scene, Smokey and the Bandit, Mad Max, Fury Road. I really like the boat scene from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade.
A great chase, excellent chase, high stakes. Yeah,
It's so good you forget the whole point of the chase was actually if we had just talked to each other.
That's right. You forget that it's the guys that are chasing them are on their side. Ultimately, yeah. It's
chases can cover up plot holes too. This is useful Dungeon Master advice.
This is a great point. Before I tell you about some of my favorites, it's like a good chase scene can really like a good action scene, in my opinion, can really like paper over some like flaws in an otherwise like mediocre film. A great example of this is I don't know if you saw this, Baby Driver. Do you remember this movie?
Yeah. Yes, of course. Edgar Wright.
Almost every single person in that movie is now canceled, I think. But and the movie itself was only so. But damn, it had some really brilliantly executed chase scenes with like excellent needle drops. Just a real delight to watch. Movie itself kind of forgettable.
Yeah. Everything else about the movie, cannot remember anything, but I remember the windshield wipers and the rock beats playing. Yeah.
Yes. I love Baby Driver. There's a great chase scene in Ronin. It's very famous.
Oh, sure.
There's I also love a good foot chase. We'll talk about this, but I don't know if you remember, but at the beginning of Casino Royale, the first of the new Daniel Craig has an amazing
with the construction
zone, chase scene on foot. There's a bunch. Parkour was really big in like the late aughts, early 2010s, and there are a bunch of movies like great parkour chase scenes. Those are a ton of fun, and Drive has a couple of like really good chases, really good like tense chases. They're not so much like careening down the highway, but trying to like weave through traffic. Obviously, the Mad Max movies are great, but the thing is, we often think of these chase scenes, right? We're thinking movies, we're thinking high octane, but chases, pursuits, these are also a key part of books, of literature. When Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli go after Merry and Pippin and the Uruk-hai, that is a chase scene. That is an extended, slow burn chase scene, but it's a chase scene.
Sure. It's a chase scene about, are you good at running?
Are you good at running? There are a bunch of sequences in the Master and Commander books, the Patrick O'Brien Maturin novels, that are extended chase scenes. And in the Master and Commander movie, it is basically more or less an extended chase scene, which is great. It's less like, again, high octane. They're not, gunning the nitrous or anything like that, but it is very like they're very like tense scenes. There's this really
just
good
imagining a more Fast and Furious, director got his or her hands on
Master Commander,
the Patrick O'Brien thing. Like, all right, what if we gave the sailing ships a boost button?
That's right.
That would,
what if they could hit the boost?
I mean, there is a boost button. You put those like flyer.
That's right.
Flyer sails.
Yeah, you
extra.
I forget what the ones
run
the
out
ones
that
are out.
The top
they're called
flyers.
run
the
out
wings.
the top sails.
Yeah.
There's in one of Alistair Reynolds' books, I think it's Absolution Gap. Bear with me, it doesn't matter. There's this amazing hard sci-fi high concept chase scene where two like almost faster than light ships, the going at like 0.9% of light speed are like in pursuit, and they're doing things like shooting out like tiny like nanobot sized depth charges and like spinning up like huge like webs across thousands of light years to try to like fuck up the pursuer. It's really like big brain stuff, but I'll never forget that. The broad point that I'm making here is that like chases have, I think, a really useful role in any sort of narrative. You don't have to be playing like a modern game or like a cyberpunk game with like cars to like want to put together a good chase scene. And they don't have to be fast either. They don't have to be, it can be pursuing someone through a crowd, or it can be like on a sailing vessel over days. And I think having a way to model that is useful.
Right. I think of the chase as like one of the fundamental action story structures.
Yes.
Just like the dungeon crawl or exploration or navigating a conspiracy or something like that. And we'll talk about some examples. Chases can be like really quick, like a single roll, check, story beat, or something like that. Could be a whole session of the night, something in between. I think why they really spice up a role-playing game more than anything else is just like, so often action scenes default in our brains because role-playing games often have numbers involved, and just to like a boring battle of attrition, and making something a chase is an easy way to break everyone, yourself included, at the table out of that mode of thinking.
Yes. And a chase is also like many of the games we talk about, especially D20 games, combat is its own thing and it's often slow, and you really wouldn't necessarily want to use it to model a chase. So doing a pursuit differently or a chase differently in a quicker way can really, like Matt said, it can shake things up. It can break you out of a certain way of thinking. And it can be an action sequence that doesn't have to be a combat, which I think is an increasingly useful tool in a GM's arsenal, because sometimes you want some action in your game, but like maybe you don't always want it to be combat. And there's lots of options there, but a chase is a really good one. And it's one that everybody sort of like fundamentally understands because everybody's seen a chase in a movie.
Yeah. I also think it's just genre agnostic in it really, for 99% of types of games, it doesn't matter if you have a medieval fantasy or, chases are still a hoot and a blast at your table. Sci-fi and spaceships and cars, on foot. Of course, any spy game or sort of pulp action game is just crying out for a chase, right? It's cyberpunk games, use a chase no matter what the genre.
Yeah. Westerns, obviously, any kind of pulp, detective, pirate, whatever. Yeah, the chase fits just about everywhere. You can always find an opportunity for it.
Okay, where do we want to begin giving our dungeon masters some advice on chases? Do we want to talk about the scale of chases or how to just kind of mix them up, or some generic advice? We also, everyone, have like gone through a ton of rules from many, many, many different systems on their chases.
I think the scale is a good one. This was a good thought by you, and what we mean by scale here is this a, like, how involved is this chase, right? Are we talking, a quick one and done? Do you catch the person you're chasing, or are you caught? Or is it going to be something like one of those Baby Driver car scenes, or the boat scene from Indiana Jones, or the car chase from Ronin, or the one in John Wick where he and Common are going through the subway station and trying to shoot each other without anybody noticing? Like,
how good with this. With the subsonic ammunition,
yes.
I love that one.
How involved is this?
Or perfect use of both of those actors. Just try not to show any expression.
They're both so good at that. They're so good at it. Or is it like Matt said?
Reeves are both. Yeah.
Is it a multiple session, like full, like, are you pursuing a sailing vessel across the sea? Are you, is it a long overland trek where you are trying to escape your pursuers? Like, figure out the scale, right?
Right. Like, for me, the quick one is super useful in your back pocket, because so often you have those plots where, okay, like, what if this person, who is antagonistic or doesn't want to be around the player characters spots them, or they do something stupid, or they're just not taking precautions? This could come up all the time. Having that, like, okay, and they're running, and instead of doing anything complicated, we're just going to say, how do you pursue them? Let's make some checks. I'm okay if they get away or they get caught. Either way is fine for how this plot is going to progress, this situation. Perfect, right? Let's roll a few checks. Everyone describe, their actions, and we'll see how they play out. And for that, like, it's great because I don't think you need any, like, special rules. You don't have to reference anything. It's kind of use your basic dungeon master adjudication skills.
Yeah, I use this one all the time, and I think the easiest way to run chases is like this, just like a GM fiat, a few quick checks, describe the action. We're going to talk about some systems that are very helpful for more involved chases, and I like those a lot. But a lot of times, I try to make sure that my players know that they have to, like, consider the consequences of their actions. And one of the things that happens the most often is they will say something stupid or frighten an NPC or otherwise do something that would result in somebody running away. And so this is something that is in my back pocket pretty frequently, and it's pretty easy to just run and say, like, you make a few checks. Oh, sorry, the guy got away because you weren't on your toes, or you catch up to them and now you got to apologize. But this is, I think,
this is the situation
way.
For me. It's like, oh, you made the check. Okay, yeah, you caught them, right? Oh, I'm super good at athletics and running, or the move skill. I, got a critical success. Perfect, right. You caught him. Or maybe that character makes a critical failure and they get away. And then if the players decide, the wizard's like, fine, I'll handle it, and they cast Dimension Door to catch them. Like, well, you spent the resources. You're
right.
there pointing your wand or your finger, burning with flame. You caught them, right? Or the rogue is like, fine, I'm going to drink my potion of speed. Perfect. There's no check needed now, but you spent that resources. That was the dramatic tension here. It's quick. It's one and done. Boom, we're on to the next scene because we don't have time tonight for something extended.
This is definitely something that you should be prepared to do, I think. It really can be just as simple as a few quick checks. Or, like Matt said, if it gets to the point, as long as the players are willing to expend a resource, a spell, a potion, something that costs anything, that's probably enough to resolve this. But this isn't what you would want to do for a more involved chase with, like, your big bad's lieutenant, or a particularly squirrely informant, right? You would probably want to have a full involved scene for something like that.
I think the next level is, like, are you going to have some kind of mechanics built around your chase using the mechanics that exist in your game? Maybe a special section of the rules. It could be the generic mechanics, or maybe you have some custom chase rules. And for this, I like to deploy it at my table if it's like a set piece. Okay, hey everyone, boom, this happened because you did this. You're here. That thing is there. It's either chasing you or you're chasing it. This is the goal. Let's lay out some kind of tracker or something like that. We'll talk about some of the options. And this is, to me, what the feel is in most action movies, where the chase is that 5 to 15 minute section of the film. The set piece chase.
The set piece chase. And I like these a lot. And, we've talked about this before. I don't do as many set piece anythings anymore because my players are unpredictable and it's annoying. But sometimes I can be guaranteed that something's going to end up with one of these. And I do like to, for these, either use the mechanics that are in place. Some systems have good ones, or there are a few that I think are really good to borrow, and we'll talk about them in a minute. But there are
some of them are even so good you maybe don't have to do the prep ahead of time, so you don't have to have a set piece prepared. Yes. That's a precious encounter that can't be skipped. It can, this would be a good time for a set piece, and I have enough tables and I have the rules that I can just make it happen on the fly.
Mm-hmm. And there are really good rules for this in a number of systems, but I think that like a combat, having actual tracking and maybe some depiction of objects in space can be helpful and can ratchet up the tension, which is really what you're trying to accomplish for a set piece chase, is to accelerate the action and make it feel like something really intense is going on.
Yeah.
But the problem, and this is the issue. We'll get to this when we talk about systems. Is you don't want to you want to find a balance, right? You want to have concrete something to show how it's going, but if it gets too fiddly, it's not going to feel like a very fast-paced chase. And there are good ways and bad ways to deal with this.
Yeah. I think the thing is the thing that for me sets the set piece apart from the quick chase is you probably need some kind of tracker most of the time, right? And we'll talk about the different methods of tracking the tension or the ebb and flow of something. But some kind of tracker is good, if not more prep. And then, for me, chases can be whole sessions. And it's been some of my most fun sessions where I said, you know what? At the end of last time, the situation the players are kind of in a situation where they need this thing and someone else is trying to keep it away from them, or, scramble the order of that subject, verb, object in any way you want. And then so I'm going to prepare this fun action session, and you can kind of extend this logic to the whole campaign, right? Maybe your whole campaign is one Battlestar Galactica where the chase is actually in the background as the players are trying to get away from the alien Cylon fleet, or something if you, from a certain perspective, the first Guardians of the Galaxy film is kind of like a chase, right? Depending on who has the purple MacGuffin, one group is chasing another faction, right? And there's 3 factions, or 4 factions. There's pirates, cops, space Nazis, and then the heroes.
Yeah, and this is, I really like this as, I love them to make the players flee from an implacable enemy. That's one of my my favorite go-tos, regardless of setting or TTRPG. Give them someone scary, and they're coming after you, and you got to get away. And I like that.
Horror
That's
games,
right.
Yes.
Horror is great for a horror game. I like that because it's open-ended. It lets them be creative, but it can set up for a really really intense and dramatic chase. Maybe slow-paced, maybe fast-paced, depending on how good they are at keeping away from the enemy in question.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, people have pointed to the fact that Mad Max Fury Road is just one long chase scene with the final 30 minutes being a reverse chase, and that's perfect, right? It's it makes so much sense. And if you're what makes a good chase, what are some interesting obstacles, a great movie for inspiration. I think also the other thing you can do if you want to deploy chases in your game, again and again to keep them fresh is just kind of flip things around, right? Sometimes the players are getting chased, they're being pursued, and sometimes they are the pursuers or the chasers. Sometimes it's a neutral third party and there are some antagonists. Sometimes the players are being chased by one faction while they're chasing another. Sometimes it's everyone's after the same MacGuffin or NPC person, right? Or sometimes it's the player characters are just trying to keep an object away from enemies that are more powerful than them.
And if it's something like an NPC or a MacGuffin, then that opens up for some really, dynamic, dramatic changes. The MacGuffin ends up on one train or ship or spaceship, and then suddenly the pursuit's going in a different direction, or it switches hands, or an additional pursuer enters the space. You can keep things really, really dramatic. It can be nice to have one car, one person to keep it simple. But if you want to up the drama and complexity, something like you're trying to catch a person or a thing, it makes for great drama. The Guy Ritchie movies are full of this, right? Snatch is basically like,
yes.
Like a big game of keep away, like, constantly like spinning, pursuits, trying to find various MacGuffins and people getting confused and, chasing
I've been
the
watching
wrong thing.
The Gentleman, and I can't not think of The Gentleman in the way it structures its plot as a Blades in the Dark game.
Yes.
In that it's simply like, here's maybe one move that the players make, and then everything else is just kind of filling in backstory as the action happens. And
That's a great point. I wish
let Guy Ritchie make that John Harper Blades in the Dark series.
That's right. I wish I'd thought of this when we were talking about Blades in the Dark. But yeah, a Guy Ritchie movie is exactly how that, and like the Ocean's movies, which we did mention, are like, that is how you do a Blades in the Dark game. It's like, here's something that happens, and then you fill it all in increasingly dramatic and hilarious ways.
Yes. Yeah, the preacher. We know him, and then, cuts to scene with the character with the preacher back when they worked for his gang or whatever.
That's right.
Yeah. You can also this is maybe breaking what a chase is a little bit, but I have found in my games, if you stop thinking about like distance and catching something, it makes for a useful variation, right? It's not that Indiana Jones can't catch the truck that has the Ark of the Covenant in it. It's that he can't take control of it. And it still kind of has some of the same dynamics of a chase in that player, new obstacles coming up, the player switches their approach or something like that. But it's not so much about distance tracking. And that can be useful for your thinking as well. Pedants will point out that maybe it's not actually a chase anymore.
Well,
but just keep that in mind.
That's a good point. But like the dramatic tension in something like the Indiana Jones truck scene, or I'm thinking of like a number of like Mission Impossible train scenes. It's not like
every
it's
single
not
one.
Exactly that like a chase is happening, but things are happening at very high speed, and they have elements of a chase. There's and that I think can be the rules that you would use to run a chase could be used for a similarly
Absolutely.
high octane dramatic moment, even if no one's actually being pursued. It's just like some sort of like conflict that happens to happen over the course of many fast-moving vehicles.
Right. It might be useful to use the same tracking mechanics to just track positionality. Indiana Jones is being dragged and into a pulp behind the truck versus, okay, well, now I'm in position 1. I'm in the driver's seat of the truck. That the same tracking mechanics might be useful to you, or this might just be a thing to think about if you're thinking about how my chase ends and I want to keep the action going, as opposed to, whatever bad guy sticks their hands up.
Well, if it's, this is not a chase, but if you were, let's say like in Indiana Jones, you're barreling towards the edge of a cliff, or your train is about to run into, the blocks at a station, or, your ship is going to run aground, then tracking position can be very useful in ratcheting up tension as your players are trying to either get something or get away before a big crash happens or something else. So even though that's not necessarily a chase, the chase rules could be useful for that.
Say barreling towards the edge of something because people used to go over waterfalls in barrels, or is it because barrels roll? Sorry, this is a stupid like stoner thought.
I don't know.
I just had, but okay. What are some generic chase advice?
Right.
Like I like to have just something for tracking distance.
Yeah. My advice. Yeah. So on tracking distance, and this is what I do for the quick type of chase, but I will sometimes do for a more involved one depending on the circumstances, is when tracking distance, use something like how lots of games do it now, just have like close, near, and far. I'll just say, you're one of 3 distances away from the pursuer. The pursuer is one of 3 away from you. But it could also be something. You can use your handy dandy easel, like we've discussed, or other forms of tokens or cards or something to track distance. As abstract as you want to be or not, I think it is good to be precise about this rather than just sort of like holding in your mind, you're this far away. Even if it's just like they're close, they're far. Just make sure your players know. They have some sort of like reference for like, the distances involved.
I'm going to put my chit down here on like a specific number, which is, it's not being precise. It's just having some kind of tracker. It doesn't matter if you're doing near or far. And then I'm also going to put some chips down on not actually using whatever granular movement rules your system has.
Yes,
I have tried
9
this.
times out of 10. Not for it. Yeah,
not for me. In my experience, it just works better to be like you're one distance away. You're one. This is like one move away, one zone. Using the just kind of like, okay, hey, we've laid out numbers 1 through 10. The enemy's at 5. If they get to 10, the chase is over. You're at 1. You're at 2 now. They're at 6. Or just keep it relative, like, okay, they're 1 away from you, you're next to them, you're 2 back. It just works better.
Yeah, do not fall down the trap of using specific like movement rules. In no game with tactical combat or any sort of like specific, are they designed for something like chases. They do not work.
I think every chase system and example in every role-playing game that I brought up brings up, hey, throw a crazy obstacle or something in front of whatever's being chased or the chasers, just things that players can interact with in their environment. They duck into a crowd, they knock over the vendor's barrel, they dive their ship into the solar flare or asteroid field. All of these are great. Just I like when I have them, especially with new players, describe you're chasing people. Some of them go over this, some of them go around it. Like, give them multiple routes to interact with any sort of obstacle, hazard, or environment.
I like, and this is because this is what I like to do, but I like to make a chart for this and appropriate to the setting and chase in question. If there's a chase through a market, I'll write down, a bunch of things, watermelons spill across the street, somebody pushes a barrel in front of you, an old lady rolls her cart out in front, all these things, so that I can either just pick if I feel like it, or I can roll if I feel like being really spicy. But you just make sure you have some prepared, even if they're not random. Just make sure that you do have these, people expect a little obstacle. And I like Matt's suggestion. There are things that, you should have lots of ways of potentially dealing with, or more than one at least.
Speaking of multiple options, a fun thing about chases is give players options for multiple routes, right?
Yeah.
You could start with just, you're in a crowded city, and if you're playing the type of game where players are encouraged to come up with, well, I think my character probably sees a shortcut that looks like this. That sounds good. Yeah, spend a token. It's there. You could do that, or you could just sort of give them, you could go over the building, or you could try and grab on to the hyper monorail that's shooting down the thing and get there faster. But it's more dangerous, right? Give them options for how to interact with the scene, multiple routes and branches. You could map these out like a flowchart, or you can just kind of have a couple, and when there's nothing else happening in the action, give the players at that point in the chase the choice. Do we want to go this way or that way? Zig or zag?
Yeah, and this gives credence. It makes the chase more real if it's a market scene. Knowing that they can go on the rooftops if they want to, or through the crowd is makes it feel like they have some choice. If it's a spaceship pursuit, can they dive into the asteroid and fly through the canyons, or go through the nebula? Give them, let them make some choices, and this can be challenging depending on your setting, but let them also just encourage them to come up with their own solutions.
Diving into the canyon is a great example. It's a thing. Chases are great for getting your improvisational ruling abilities up. It's also useful if you're using a system to think about what's the mechanic you want to just default to. Oh, okay, you're going through the canyon. If your pursuers want to go after you, everyone's going to have to make a pilot check. Failure means for you'll take damage to your shields. For your pursuers, each one that fails is going to slam into the canyon walls and die. Okay, this is the scene from Empire Strikes Back. It works great. It can also be something like, think about when your players want to do something, anything. What's the effect? Well, the ranger says, I want to shoot that zombie bat with an arrow, because ranger with the bow and arrow, that's what they've been doing. Fine, find a way to reward that. Okay, that means on the next time the zombie bat makes its pilot or fly or move check, it will be at disadvantage if you hit, but it's a difficult shot. Yeah,
this is a great place to get a little creative with the rules and work on your improvisation, because most systems don't have real hard and fast rules for if your players want to throw a barrel behind their stagecoach as it's going. The things, they are going to come up with creative solutions that are not necessarily explicitly laid out in the system most of the time, and there are answers to that, but you're going to have to think on your feet, which is good, which is fun.
Yeah. Chases can be a good way to encourage your players to open up their creative director's chair abilities, right? Especially if they're in the lead or being pursued in the chase. Say, okay, you're in the city. What do you want to do? You can go anywhere. You're in a hypercar, and they say, well, I want to go on to the mega Autobahn. No, I want to dive into the slums where things are narrow. Okay, just let them make that big choice. And of course, if they falter, give them 2 or 3 options.
Yeah. Options is key. I was just remembering, I ran a chase for my Cyberpunk players, which went pretty well, but they were not as well versed in car chase cinema as I am, and they struggled.
You've studied this, Rob.
They struggled to come up with, well, what do I do? I'm being chased, and eventually I was like, well, here's some checks you can make, and here's some things you can do, and you're traveling down the highway at this speed, and making sure they understood the options available to them and describing those in detail opened the whole chase up. But make sure your players know if they're not necessarily just jumping with their creative solutions on their own, give them a menu, a selection to choose from.
Well, here's an example from a game I ran, which is another way to unlock creativity is to just put them at a massive disadvantage. Maybe something the game is not normally about, right? If this was a D&D game, it would be like, well, there's a giant dragon that you can't fight attacking and you've got to get out of here. In the game I ran, it was there was a giant robotic mech attacking, and the players were not in comparable gear. They were on foot, and they had to get to the airfield, right? Not only is it a chase, you're also trying to figure out, I can't get seen by this thing because it can level a city block in one shot. What do I want to do? And then, maybe your players are going to come up with a fancy way to get out of the city, or maybe they're going to, some of them are going to really use their creativity to Empire Strikes Back, Battle of Hoth, trip this robot up so that they can take it down and everyone in the city can escape, which is what happened with my players.
Should we talk about some specific systems? Because
sure.
This general advice is good, and we have more, but we got a bunch of different ones that you can draw from. And
my two last generic piece of advice that I got from these specific systems that I'll say very briefly is that often chase mechanics, if you maybe play them rules as written, like the players just lose, and maybe that's something you don't want to happen. This is the time to failing the check means the situation gets worse. Your car, your ship, your person, you're still running forward, but now you got hit and you're leaking plasma fluid, or instead of being on the wyvern's back, you're holding on to its tail. Just make the situation worse. Don't put them out of the chase. And then the second one is, a lot of times, chase rules, in my experience, especially now having read as many chase rules as possible, I tend to like the ones that are vehicle chase rules better than personal ones. So just treat your players, if you're on foot or something, like vehicles. Just be like, well, yeah, you're always running. You don't have to use your action to run. You do other things as you run. We're pretending the action to run doesn't happen. You do your other thing while you're running, just as if you're driving a vehicle. Yeah, actually, sorry. I'm glad you brought those up. Those are both really good points. During the chase, it is not important. You're running at the same speed, right? If it's a chase worth experiencing, worth watching, right? Like, you're not having to like make a check to see how far you run every time, like every round that comes up. And so treat your players like a vehicle they're just going. They're just going. Yeah, also this is great advice. I mean, they should be able to fail eventually, but it's so much more interesting to me that like a failure means a complication. And there are a lot of great complications that you can throw in for any kind of chase. Something goes wrong, something gets broken, there's a new pursuer, some bad guy grabs onto the side of the car, blah, blah, blah. That's way more interesting than like, you fail and you're caught. Right. Save that for many, many failures in a row. Yeah. Or like, hey, it's been going along long enough. You haven't caught him. Okay, it's over. Just think of the situation where the players dive into the crowd, shouldering people aside, trying to get to the person, and you call for some kind of check, charisma, or whatever the skill is to catch the person. The player botches miserably. If you want the chase to end, that's fine. But instead, just say you bump into someone in the crowd, and it's a cop. And, of course, you're wanted. And now there's a cop chasing you, too. It's classic movie stuff. Just add a complication instead of you lose ground. A great example of this is the opening sequence of Aladdin, where gotta eat to live. Gotta steal to eat. Every time he goes through a door or window, like something happens. He keeps running into people. One step. I guess he does get caught, but up until that point, he's constantly like
something's in his way and he's, dealing with it. It's, Okay, let's talk about some rules.
Instead of failing, you land into the ladies' room.
That's right.
Like, hey, Aladdin. Okay. The systems we've gonna briefly talk about and hit on some of our favorites is Dungeons & Dragons 4E, 5E, Savage Worlds Adventure Edition, Blades in the Dark, Star Wars RPG by Fantasy Flight / Genesys system, Call of Cthulhu 7th Edition, Pathfinder 2E, and Knights Black Agents. All right, which one of these do you want to start with, Rob?
Let's start at the top. Let's do 4E and 5E because I think that they're relevant. I'm going to just up top say we're not going to talk about them for very long because I don't think they're very good, but there are chase rules, and so we should discuss them briefly.
So 4E suggests you use a skill challenge for a chase. It's just a special type of skill challenge. And,
now, Matt, how do you feel about skill challenges?
Listen, they're not my favorite in specific practice and how they're implemented. They're not my favorite. However, as a generic idea of like, hey, there's a thing we got to accomplish and there's multiple ways to accomplish it, it's not the worst idea, right? It's not that dissimilar than clocks. It's just more dissociative.
Yeah.
But for a chase,
it's okay.
I don't know.
Yeah, I've softened on skill challenges since 4E came out, but it's simple. You've got a number of checks you have to make and a number of skills associated with it, and it's basically just like a tally. It's not unlike a clock, but it is, like Matt said, it's just like a little bit too abstracted, a little too dissociated. It doesn't feel very like. It's just like, you're just racking up, ones or zeros, and it doesn't feel very involved to me. So that is an option, though. Like, you could do worse in a pinch. Like, that would be a good thing to do for an off-the-cuff if you didn't have anything better prepared.
Right. Just think about, I like the skill challenge rules in that they encourage you to think about there are multiple ways to solve a problem. And if you just add some kind of distance tracker to them and treat successes as shortening or lengthening the distance depending on the situation, that kind of works. 5E's rules, while have some great specific advice on like how to add in a complication or something, they don't really give you an overall mechanic for chases. Other than the special rule that there's a limited number of dashes people can do before they have to start making checks. And I just want to tell you, even without having to play this is probably not the best way. The specific advice is fine. The general rules are not something you want to use.
We talked about this briefly in our most recent review of the new DMG. There's a couple of charts. Like I said, I like having a chart here. There's a couple of complications which I like and I would borrow, but the actual rules do that beautiful thing that D&D loves to do these days where it gives you like 50% of what you need. And I would really prefer like 0 or 100. It's just like half the rules are there and it's not really enough to actually like run a chase. So I wouldn't use these.
Here's one good thing that I missed from my like advice on what you should have is the 5e rules have 24 total table entries for complications. You'll want some kind of table or just a list you've jotted down of complications, and this can be accomplished by searching the internet for chase complications or any other rule book, but it's a good reminder to have something like this in front of you during a chase.
Matt, I literally gave that advice. You gotta pay attention.
I was too busy running, Rob, and I missed it. I failed my check.
We are actively engaged in a chase right now, and Matt is distracted. Yeah. But this is good advice, and I would
they're behind me.
I would use both of these. This is exactly the kind of chart that you should have in front of you. 1d12 complications. That is a good advice here. Okay, yes. What do we want to talk? Let's talk about Savage Worlds next, because this is, if not my favorite, then definitely like top 2. It's got to be like one of these, and it's a little involved.
Yeah,
it is more complicated than much of what we have discussed, but I think it's good. I think it's a good system for running chases.
to me, there's like two parts here. One is like a great way of generically tracking things. Savage Worlds loves using playing cards.
Yes.
I think these work great for a chase in that you can be like, all right, this ace represents the chasm that the person just jumped over.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. And so you can track relative distance or absolute distance. You can keep adding cards, which is great. And then you could add 2 cards to represent a diverging path. This is a great way to track things, whether you're making something on the fly or you just need to show players what's in your notes. And it can be used for any system.
Yes.
The second part is like a bunch of specific rules.
Yeah. That's exactly right. That is exactly what I was going to say. The cards is so good. This is such like a brilliant idea. You're just laying out cards to like mark distance and effect and, sort of lay out the path of pursuit. It's very, very simple. It's dynamic. It's fast paced. I love using the cards. That's something that you can borrow for any system. And this is one of the ones that I would recommend if you want to have something a little bit crunchier and more concrete. Steal that part of this and just use that to demonstrate your chase. The second part is fine, but it is a lot of like specifics about like what means what and all that. It's pretty good. They're pretty good rules, but you don't need the crunchy second part. The first part is honestly plenty by itself.
The second part, unless you're just playing Savage Worlds, then
right.
Why are you even listening to this? Just go play Savage Worlds, have fun.
Worlds.
But if you wanted to adapt the second part, it would mean like sort of laying out 5 or 6 actions that anyone could take during a chase that are useful, right? Like, hey, disrupt the pursuer, like gain ground, do some evasion or something like that. Like if you want more formalized chase rules, I do have to say these are pretty good ones if you want to incorporate them into whatever system you're running. But otherwise, you don't need them. Just read their advice on the cards.
Yeah. This is a good one to read if you've got access to the Adventure Edition. It's very well designed. It thinks about a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about, during the entire pod. They're thinking about how to run chases, how to make them fun. It's veers a little bit too fiddly. It that area I talked about where you're doing too much calculating and it's not like a
right.
fun
You've
chasing.
made a second combat system.
Yeah.
Is essentially what they've done.
But
it's fine because it's simple still.
It's pretty simple and it's good. Like everything else in Savage Worlds, it can once you've got the like fundamentals, it goes real fast. But it's the cards themselves, laying them out as just like a way to mark your chase is a brilliant thing that you can and should borrow for any system. You don't have to do any adaptation whatsoever.
I feel like there was an earlier version of the D&D 5e 2024 rulebook that had like a 4-page sub system for chases, and it got edited down somehow and then completely reworked. But there were a couple lines that like made me think, that seemed like
maybe there used to be more here.
Yeah. Anyway, regardless, all that stuff. What other systems you want to talk about? Again, I feel like Savage Worlds is really great, but if you want to go, I guess, simpler, you could just do Blades in the Dark.
Blades in the Dark. Yeah, this is another one that would be really easy to borrow. You don't have to do any adaptation at all, and that's just using clocks. And I know that clocks are not specifically an invention of Blades in the Dark, but we're going to use them as reference here. You can just do. Here's the thing: you could do just a clock. You can just do one clock, and it's
caught, escape.
But there's also a sort of like racing clock, which is there's 2 clocks opposed, and the PCs and their opponents are both sort of like working on their clock at the same time. And this is very, very simple, but like we said earlier, this is not all that much different from like a skill challenge in 4E, but the way that it works in a game like Blades in the Dark, and just I think the representation of the clock makes it feel a little bit more grounded and concrete than the skill challenge, and is also like very easy to understand.
You'll also, if you, instead of just looking at the racing clock rules on the Blades in the Dark SRD, if you're playing the actual Forged in the Dark system for Blades of the Dark or Scum and Villainy, right, you're also telling the larger story that the chase is built around, right? How did the players get this turbocharger or like what it means when they turn it on and stuff like that as you do flashbacks or flash forwards or what have you.
I mean,
it's also
the clocks are a great system for all sorts of things, but that's why they're there. That's why they're in the system. Is they're a really like useful tool. So this is one of many excellent applications of the clock.
It's also reminds me that one of the best ways to just like run chases is just say, here's the situation, here's what's after you, or here's what you're after. And then chases are just perfect, as you said before, vocabulary for just letting things spiral from the actions and failures and successes the players make at the table, because it just makes perfect sense to someone will come up with the consequence of failing that pilot check or failing that hide or climb roll.
Mm-hmm. I'd forgotten about this one until you reminded me, but yeah, the Genesys system has this is a pretty simple chase mechanic.
Yeah, the Genesys system has, I think, pretty satisfactory, at least from when I have played it, rules for like vehicle combat, right?
Yeah.
It's its flagship property is a Star Wars game, and you can't have a Star Wars game without having,
some dogfighting, some space chases. Yeah, I remember I've played it a couple times, and I did find we've talked about this at length. It is hard to do spaceship or ship combat, but Genesys does a pretty good job.
Yeah, and it's great if you want a quick thing. It's like, hey, roll some kind of check, compare the number of successes. The winner means the distance closes or lengthens. And then on top of that basic framework, add all your cool maneuvers, and you as the DM add obstacles and use your weapons and stuff like that.
Yeah, the key innovation here is that you're rolling a bunch of dice, and it's always fun to roll a bunch of dice. And in this case, it's you're sort of like comparing your various skills and checks to that of your pursuer or pursued, and it's fun and simple and relatively quick.
If you wanted a game with a full chapter on chases, the 7th edition of Call of Cthulhu, which I think it's your basic role-playing game engine, has a nice full chapter, which I think is kind of what we want for a chase system. For me, this one's just like a little too detailed. Like I would prefer something fiction first as opposed to tracking every little thing about movement, but that's a personal preference. If you want something for a nice 1920s car chase, you could do worse than Call of Cthulhu 7th edition.
Yeah, I like this one, and it is a little bit involved, but all the things that I enjoy about chases, they've clearly thought about. They put a lot of thought into the fiction and the mechanics of a chase. It is a little bit like, I wouldn't borrow this for a different system. It's too crunchy. But if I were running Call of Cthulhu, I would absolutely use the chase rules because they work really well with the system, and they're fun. They're just, it is a little too granular than what I normally would prefer for a chase.
Yeah. However, I do love and I hate Pathfinder 2E's chase system, because Pathfinder 2E. Rob, I don't want to be too cruel here, because we know we both love the system, but there is a certain arrogance to Pathfinder 2E's like
there is
action economy. It's we built this thing that's so beautiful. Every number of moves and things is so well balanced. How could you not just use this exact system to run chases?
Right. Why wouldn't everything fit into our perfectly designed, masterful look? I get your criticism is correct. I love 2E. I don't know. They're just like a little bit too engineering brained. Like I appreciate how nicely it all fits together when I understand it, but I have to spend a lot of time like wrangling my mind into the Pathfinder 2E space. That being said, it does a lot of the things that we talked about.
Right.
Playing
that being
cards.
Said, they just are like, hey, okay, we know we built this, but then let's just use the playing cards or
Yes.
10 sections of paper.
Yeah. Here's some playing cards. They've got a pretty like nice description of how you might use, how you might set up the track, creating obstacles, running this chase. These are good rules, and they're short. This is a couple of pages. This is something that you could absolutely borrow for another game. It's a very like simple version of what Matt and I have already discussed. It has rules for tracking distance and obstacles and all that, but it's very borrowable, I think.
Yeah. I think it brilliantly, and I think this is kind of where I thought the, treat your players like vehicles really came to my mind in the 4, is it says your character's actual speed should not affect essentially how they move through the chase, how they move through whatever you're using as a tracker. However, speed bonuses, right? And then you have to calculate a baseline speed, which is, maybe a little too complicated, but just think about if you're a faster character, give them a bonus on all of the checks that are happening. And this works for vehicles. This works for people running. If you're a slower character, give them a penalty. If, for example, the baseline, let's assume, Rob, assume a frictionless Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, that's right. Assume a perfectly spherical pursuit.
Yeah, a 30-foot baseline D&D speed, right? And so if your character is an elf that's 5 foot faster, give them a +2 on all their checks. If they're a dwarf that's 5 feet slower, give them a -2 on checks that would involve running really fast, but maybe nothing else or something like that, right? And then, just treat everyone like a vehicle. Just treat speed bonuses as things that add to your ability to navigate this obstacle course we're building for the players instead of tracking the distance that each person moves per round.
Right. Which brings us to another one. And Matt, thanks for bringing this up. I'd read this before, but I forgot about it. One from Knights Black Agents.
Black's Agents.
And there's a bunch of cool rules in here, but they've got, I really love these. There's a set of rules on thriller chases, and I really like these. And I think this is designed, for like a spy movie or a detective flick. You're trying to pursue somebody, and it's kind of like it's a bidding, it's a hidden reveal type of contest. But what I like about it is that the goal is, it's abstracted in a way that I like. The goal is for the pursuer to reduce the lead of the pursued to 0, right? And so all these checks and challenges increase your lead or decrease your lead. And I really, I don't know, something about that like way of abstracting it like really like appeals to me. And you could do it for other things besides like a spy thriller chase, but it works really well for that kind of tension, I think.
I was mostly thinking about this one in that, Knights Black Agents uses the gumshoe system, which is not really about action. Like the action kind of part is an afterthought. It's like separated from the investigation. And yet these are like brilliant, easy to understand. Like the chase rules take like 2 or 3 pages and they're fun. It just shows that there's no excuse for not writing some good chase rules. If that's something you want to do for your system, it's just not that hard. Because I can't think of a system that's less good for this than Gumshoe, but it works. It's so good. It's so good, right? The secret bids, anytime you have a token system. This actually, Rob, if you were doing some kind of, let's say a sci-fi or a sailing system, and you want to bid, okay, how much of our power are we using this round to navigate this obstacle? A secret bid is a fun way to amp up your chase system.
This is I can't believe I didn't think of something like this, but yeah, it really like elevates the tension. The tension is in the bid, is in the the resource management rather than the actual like action of the scene. That can be there too. This is a great way. The thing I love, mechanics, feed the narrative. It's really, really well done. This is really great.
Yeah, there are a lot of chase systems, and I think like for me, at the end of the day, the thing I'm going to come back to is like having the basic idea of the tracker, of the obstacles, of the paths, and of not treating everyone like, they're moving their exact distance, just having some kind of run check or something if you want to gain an extra thing. But yeah, that's going to be with me like through basically any system.
Yeah, I there's a lot of things that we've talked about that I like. I agree with Matt. It's tracking distance, it's throwing obstacles and complications in there. It's providing opportunity for branching paths or creativity. And yeah, it is sort of like frustrating how many systems make the mistake of asking you to calculate like how, rolling your movement speed or whatever. Like any chase you've ever thought of, like, what are you paying attention to? Like, how close are the cars to each other? Not like, or how close is like the one runner to the other runner? Like, not precisely how like fast they're going. It's like in relation to each other is like what's tense and exciting about the chase,
It's not that the Millennium Falcon is faster or slower than the TIE fighters. It just doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I know exactly how fast both of those things are, and it doesn't matter. It does not. Right. It does not matter.
Millennium Falcon 120 clicks per hour. TIE fighters are 100, I think. Right.
Yeah, I think that's right. Okay. Something like that.
From our old TIE fighter video game.
Yeah, that's right.
Knowledge. But yeah, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
If one of these is faster, give them a bonus on whatever thing to navigate, or a penalty, or say that means whenever you get to the open spot, the faster one wins the chase. Yeah. And it's the point of getting to that place. Think about deploying chases more often as a way to just really have action that's not the same old sort of hit point slugfest.
Yes. That's the key thing here is, right, everybody understands sort of like the action sequence of a chase, and it's a great way to introduce some excitement to any type of game without necessarily having to get into hit points or even necessarily like initiative. One of the great things about a lot of what we've discussed is that it can set up really fast. You can just like go into a chase in laying out a few cards or pieces of paper, and then you're off. And that's what I want from more things all the time. That's what I want from combats, but we are still shackled to lots of systems that don't support that. And this is what I like about all the chase systems we've discussed, that you can get going real fast.
Yeah, we didn't really talk about initiative, and most people don't. I think the answer is the initiative system is like use whatever you want during a chase.
Yeah.
Like to me, I have run chases with a variety of initiative systems, and it's mostly irrelevant.
The Savage Worlds rules have a pretty good approach to the initiative system. You're drawing cards pretty frequently, which is one of the things I love about Savage Worlds is you're not latched to like one initiative for the entire sequence, and so it just sort of like measures how fast you're going or like in what order you act. That's the kind of initiative I would recommend for something like a chase. But yeah, also maybe it matters in the first scene and doesn't really matter after that. Like you just,
use whatever initiative system you're normally using. I think that's one that ports over pretty well.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Rob, I think I'm going to take this, instead of going around these two ships that are getting tugboated together, I'm going to take this podcast directly between them.
That's right.
That's okay with you.
That is okay with me, but it means we have to wrap up real quick because...
okay, all right. They're getting closer.
They're getting closer. Thank you all for listening, everybody. If you have your own thoughts about chases or other types of action scenes or sequences or dramatic narrative moments you'd like us to discuss, drop us a line at dmofnone@gmail.com.
Oh, yeah. Or you can hit us up on Discord. And if you want to support the show and listen to some more stuff, we have a Patreon at patreon.com/dungeonmasterofnone.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Stay ahead of those pursuers and keep rolling them dice.